Okay, everyone. This is some notes on Jorge Luis Borges, The Warrior and the Captive, which can be a pretty daunting reading if you've never read Borges before. And what might initially come off as a sort of dry historical document turns out to be a very interesting literary experimental piece of fiction. Okay, so I'm just going to read some of the notes here that I made. You might have encountered the Latin inscription in this story. I'm going to go over what these Latin inscriptions are. First one, terribles visu facis sed mente benignus, longaque robusto pectoro barba fuit. His face was terrifying to gaze upon, with a long full beard hanging down to his chest, but his mind was kind and open. The second Latin inscription, Contempsit Carlos dum nos amat, ille parentes hanc patriam reputans esse ravena suam. Eventually, he was contemptuous of his own parents and loved us and this country, regarding Ravenna as if it was his own. These are some inscriptions that the narrator in the story, who we can perhaps presume is Borges, um, discovers while reading this book written by the Italian historian Benedicto Croce, which mentions these very strange inscriptions to this Lombard warrior. And Lombard, you can think of as a Germanic warrior, who's come to actually sack or invade the city of Ravenna, which is the city uh, in the eastern province, the eastern capital of the Roman Empire. And he's come to sack this city, but this inscription says that even though when the citizens first saw him, he was very terrifying because he was an invader, a barbarian invader, right? By the end of the Latin inscription, we see that Drotkov has become a citizen of Ravenna, so much so that the citizens pay tribute to him with this Latin inscription. Okay, so this is an interesting little, obscure historical footnote that the narrator, picks up. Okay, and the next Latin phrase you might see, and is subspecies aeternitatis, right? And what that means is under the sign of eternity. And that's a phrase that means that the reason why the narrator uses that phrase is because he's going to tell us that the person or event that he's going to be talking about is not necessarily the historical person, but the mythical person. All right, drawn with much speculation and poetic license. So in this case, the narrator is going to tell us that even though there isn't much known about this Lombard warrior Ravana, he's going to invent, right? He's going to imagine what he was like and why he was so dazzled by the splendor of the Byzantine architecture and Byzantine art, the brilliant mosaics, so much so that he lands up not only not in sacking the city, but becoming a citizen, right? He becomes captivated. This is what's interesting, right? The barbarian warrior becomes captivated by the city and the culture he's come to destroy. Okay, and this is paired the next with the story that Borges tells about. Uh, tells about the story that his English grandmother told him about the blue-eyed English woman she saw once, who was kidnapped by the local indigenous people from the Argentinian plains, the Pampas. Rather than accept the grandmother's advice to help her escape, the woman tells her that she's happy with the natives, right? And she goes back into the desert. Okay, and in this case, the fates are inverted. Whereas in Drotkov, the barbarian becomes uh, quote unquote civilized. Here, the woman from civilization, the blue eyed English woman, becomes goes native. Okay, becomes barbarian. All right, and this fascinates the narrator. Okay, and again, we'll assume this is Borges because a lot of Borges's fiction, he called it ficciones, was a blend of fact and fiction. And you'll see this motif in Borges about the mystical library, as he presents himself as the mystical librarian who encounters these very obscure figures and footnotes from secret histories. And when he does that, the proposition that he lays upon readers is that there's a secret history of the universe, okay, in these texts, okay. So initially, it's easy to underappreciate or not even notice this fantastical nature in Borges's fiction. You might read this, when you first read this, you might have thought of it as some kind of historical document, and it read pretty dry, until you realize that Borges is mostly inventing the facts here. Okay, all right, and he does this, right, because he's trying to make an argument about uh, the literary encounter, or I should say, an argument about the encounter between two cultures. Okay, the native culture, and you might say European culture. Okay, all right. So he sees both the English woman and Drodkop's fates mirrored, and he has this line where he notes how his grandmother must have seen her own fate mirrored in the captive woman's story, since his English grandmother too has left, right? The English continent, the European continent, for South America, right? This and eventually, quote unquote, goes native herself, right? Becomes assimilated, right? So a few quick things about Borges, right? He often gets credited with founding with other Latin American writers a style of writing known as magical realism, and that's largely because of this fantastical element in his writing, which is often rooted in historical fact. But he only uses these historical facts as sort of touch points or touchstones. Touchstones, yes, touchstones. Um, to speculate, to philosophize, to offer what if history had went this way instead of that way, right? And when readers encounter Borges' fiction, this is what readers tend to enjoy with his fiction, is this element of what if, and this idea of um, speculation and fantasy. The stories are actually deeply philosophical as they are literary. Okay, so you might be wondering, why did I start here with this Borges story? In fact, it's always dangerous for an instructor like me to start with a story like this, because for most students it could seem really dry and boring, right? And I imagine when you read this, you were thinking something like, "Oh, I hope this isn't what we're going to read this whole semester." No, but the reason why I have you read this story is because Borges has an argument about the literary encounter between two cultures, right? And this is how I'd like you to think of yourself in this class as we sort of, go on our own voyage, right? We're going to encounter the literatures of other cultures written in other languages, right? And I'd like us to think of ourselves as warriors and captives. Okay, all right. Warriors in the sense where we're sort of, taking on the challenge of encountering these different literatures and different cultures, and hopefully we become captivated by them. Okay, so that's really it. I mean, I'm not sure what you thought of the story. I'll be reading your discussion post, but that's all I want to say now about it. And like I said, I'm going to make this available, this Word document. As you can tell, I'm not very skilled at making videos. I am saying a lot, not very fluid, but I hope this is helpful nevertheless. Bye bye.